Hey guys, just wanted to do a video on the NWO. This week is the 25th anniversary of the formation of the New World Order back in 1996. Probably one of my favorite storylines, angles, groups in professional wrestling. I was a huge NWO mark or fan back in the day. Just wanted to talk about it. I know WWE is having a lot of like videos and on their YouTube channel and all their social media, really talking about the landmark 25th anniversary of the NWO. I really say like in wrestling in the past like 20 to 25 years, though there's only been like two like big angles or storylines in wrestling: the heel group taking over the company or taking over the group, heel group trying to take over the company, and the authority figure, evil authority figure like the McMahon Austin. And for so many years, wrestling companies have really tried to do their version of the NWO, or their version of WWE for so many years tried to that recycled Austin McMahon formula with other people playing the parts. For many years, Eric Bischoff was the heel general manager against John Cena and all these other people. Uh, Paul Heyman played that role. Stephanie McMahon. Triple H. When they were their authority a couple years ago. There's not many different like shocking storylines or different. Like, everything's a rehash. Look at the NWO. TNA tried to form their own NWO with Immortal many years ago, and then they tried it again with Aces of Eight. Even WWE, with the Nexus, when the Nexus formed, back in the and they did that like angle on Raw when they pretty much destroyed everything and destroyed the ring and everything. That has similarities. I kind of was thinking about NWO and that. And then recently with Retribution, that kind of had like that mystery, like who are these people kind of thin vibe, but they kind of really dropped the ball on that. But yeah, back in 1996, the wrestling business, it was different. It wasn't like you could go online. Dave Meltzer still had his Wrestling Observer. You can I never subscribed to it. Wrestling websites were still, it was kind of still a new thing, so you wouldn't really, nothing was really spoiled to you. So I just, had to watch on TV and find out what would happen. But I'm saying in the wrestling business of '96, it was really the start of the mid to late '90s wrestling boom, which we hadn't seen since like the mid to late '80s. Wrestling boom. When WWE was, on MTV, they had the Rock and Roll Connection. WrestleMania 3, Pontiac Silverdome, selling that out. It was, and then, 89, 90 is when the wrestling kind of like went, kind of popularity kind of dropped down. McMahon trying to look at the Ultimate Warrior as the next Hogan, that didn't work out. NWA goes out of business. Ted Turner buys, Jim Crockett Promotions and forms WCW. So the landscape was changing in the early '90s, and it came to a point where, like a lot of it wasn't as popular as it was in the '80s. WWE was going in a different direction. They were going with the younger talent, the new generation. So around '96, they were still in that new generation era. It wasn't until later they would go into a more extreme attitude era. WCW, they went on a different direction. They went with established stars, like Hogan, Macho Man, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, guys that we've been accustomed to, that we knew who they were. And that nostalgic, getting the fans that hey, I watched these guys in the '80s. Let me watch now them in WCW. So '96, I've always been a WWE fan, and I was a little upset when I saw like Hall, and Nash, going over to WCW, because I always associated WWE or WWF at the time as the big leagues, like the big wrestling company. And I felt like, oh, like I was like thinking like, oh man, who's Nash and Hall going to really feud with, in WCW. But yeah, and then like I remember, as a watching Monday Night Nitro, May of '96, when I think it was Memorial Day weekend, and having like Scott Hall coming through the crowd and and to the ring, and I was like, wow, that was a shocker. And a couple weeks later, Nash shows up, and again, I was a huge Diesel fan. Still am. I'm still a huge Kevin Nash fan. I know a lot of people don't like him, but I'm a huge Kevin Nash fan, and I was sold. And then they had like the build up, probably one of the best build ups to a pay per view. What we like in wrestling is that mystery, the build up, that we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know, and it could, and you sit there and you're watching it, and that shock value when Hogan, came down at, and he was revealed as the third member of the NWO, and I honestly think that kind of kept Hogan relevant for a couple more years, because the red yellow Hogan, in WCW was kind of fading out, and he wasn't getting the reaction, that the '80s Hogan would have gotten. And I think McMahon kind of knew, like, when he wanted to shift things in '92 and kind of like not have the focus on Hogan anymore, and he was looking for other people like Bret Hart. And he knew that the popularity of Hogan wasn't like as big as it was during the '80s. And WCW made some money off it, for a while, but I think it was a good time for him to, turn heel. And man, I would say like NWO was like, it was like such a great, watching like Monday Nitro on, every Monday. I mean, it was like during those periods where you would wish the weekend away just to get to Monday. Like I would be so happy. Oh, Monday, great. Go to school, come home, and just count the hours down to Nitro and see what the NWO what they were gonna do. Again, with wrestling, everything is, like if they find something that works in wrestling, they'll use it until the very end, until it's watered down. I think the best, NWO is probably, the formation of '96, that summer of '96, all the way probably until a little bit at the beginning of '98. I think that if I was the booker, and if I had '97, they built the whole thing with Hogan and Sting. I would have, of course, had Sting win cleanly and not have like the fast count, all that. You can listen to all that on Eric Bischoff's 83 Weeks podcast. They talk about it, a whole show about Starrcade '97. Very interesting. And then it came to a point where like I would have like had like kind of like that's when I would have started the divisions within the NWO. In '98, they did the split with NWO Wolfpack led by Kevin Nash, and then NWO Hollywood, and again it never really they never really like led to anything. You would think maybe it led to a War Games match, but it never did. And then they did the Finger Poke of Doom in '99, and that was kind of like a way for them to reform the NWO, the original members, Hall, Nash, and Hogan, and give Goldberg someone to feud with, in the beginning of '99, and this is weird because that was like, in interviews, Kevin Nash have said that was the purpose of reforming the NWO, was to give Goldberg people to feud with, and line up all these guys that he has to get through in order to get Hogan, and the payoff would be like a match with Hogan at probably a pay per view, like what instead of doing it on live TV like they did last, when Goldberg originally won the title, maybe save it for a pay per view. But it was weird because if you watch that that era of WCW, Goldberg went on to feud with Bam Bam Bigelow, and then Hogan went on again to feud with Ric Flair. So that was February and March of 1999. And then, Flair and Hogan did like the double turn. Basically, Hogan turned face during the match, and Ric Flair turned heel during the match. And all this thing, and a couple months later, Hogan's back with, the red yellow, and he's feuding with Kevin Nash. It doesn't really make any sense. And I think one of the criticisms with the NWO was that they kept on putting too many people in there. But again, if you listen to like interviews with Eric Bischoff, he's mentioned that the reason why they like so many people join the NWO and a lot of these like lower mid card guys like Scott Norton, Buff Bagwell, um, Vincent, Brian Adams, all those guys joined. Was because the original plan was they were going to split the rosters, kind of like how they do it now with Raw and SmackDown. WCW, NWO would be featured on Nitro, and WCW would be featured on Thunder. So they would have two brands. I'm not sure why that didn't happen. That did not happen. But I guess things change, and who knows? But I always say, for me, I don't want to make this too long of a video. The best, NWO, just being a kid back in '96, watching Nitro, watching those shows, and just like that mystery. What a great angle! What we love about wrestling. They brought almost a kind of a realism to it, and that mystery of like, okay, who's going to be part of the NWO? And they did that pretty good. The third member, and then the fourth member. I would say, man, if you could go back on, the WWE Network and just watch, Nitro and the pay-per-views from like July, start with Bash at the Beach 1996 and go all the way down to like, just finish off that year and go to like, Starrcade 96 and just watch the Nitros and the pay-per-views. And that was one of the best like stories and just suspense. And you look at the wrestling today and it's just not the same, unfortunately. But yeah, it was just a good times of wrestling back in those mid to late '90s.